Immediately after the seizure of intrigues, Desaix came to see me. Conversing with him about Pichegru, I remarked that we had been greatly deceived and expressed my surprise that his treason had not been discovered sooner. Why, said Desaix, we knew of it 3 months ago. How can that be possible? I replied. Desaix then recounted to me the manner in which Moreau, with whom he had been at that time, had found in the baggage of the Austrian general Klingsport a correspondence of Pichegru's, in which his plans in favor of the Bourbons were detailed, and those of the false maneuvers which he intended to put in practice. I asked Desaix if this had been communicated to the Directory. He replied no, that Moreau did not wish to ruin Pichegru, and had desired him to say nothing about it. I told Desaix that he had acted very wrong, that he ought immediately to have sent all the papers to the Directory, as I had done. And in fact, it was tacitly conniving at the destruction of his native country. As soon as Moreau was informed that Pichegru was found out, he denounced him to the army as a traitor, and sent to the Directory the papers containing the proofs of it, which he had kept concealed in his possession for some months, and allowed Pichegru to be chosen chief of the legislative body, though he knew that he was plotting the destruction of the Republic. Moreau was accused this time, and with justice, of double treachery. Thou hast first, it was said, betrayed thy country by concealing the treason of Pichegru, and afterwards thou hast uselessly betrayed thy friend by disclosing what thou oughtest to have made known before, but which, when concealed by thee until it was discovered by other means, ought to have ever remained a secret in thy breast. Moreau never recovered the esteem of the public again. I mentioned the retreat of Moreau and asked that if he had not displayed great military talents in it. That retreat, replied the Emperor, instead of being what you say, was the greatest blunder that ever Moreau committed. If he had, instead of retreating, made a detour and marched in the rear of Prince Charles, I think he said, he would have destroyed or taken the Austrian army. The Directory were jealous of me and wanted to divide, if possible, the military reputation, and as they could not give credit to Moreau for a victory, they did for a retreat, which they caused to be extolled in the highest terms, though even the Austrian generals condemned Moreau for having done it. You may probably hereafter, continued Napoleon, have an opportunity of hearing the opinion of French generals on the subject who were present, and you will find it consonant to mine. Instead of credit, Moreau merited the greatest censure and disgrace for it. As a general, Pichegru had much more talents than Moreau. Moreau ridiculed the idea of the formation of the Legion of Honor when he heard from someone that it was intended also to be given to those who had distinguished themselves in science and not to be confined to feat of arms alone. He replied, well then, I shall apply for my cook to be made a commander of the order, as his talents are most superior in the science of cookery. In reply to some arguments which I offered to convince him that blank and the English blank were ignorant of that part of Pichegru's plot which embraced assassination, Napoleon replied, I do not suppose that blank or any other the English blank actually said to George or Pichegru, you must kill the first consul, but they well knew that such formed the chief and indeed the only hope of success, and yet knowing this furnished them with money and provided ships to land them in France, which to all intents and purposes rendered them accomplices, and if blank had been tried by an English jury, he would have been condemned as such. Lord Blank took great pains to persuade the foreign courts that they were ignorant of the project of assassination, and wrote several letters in which he acknowledged that the English had landed men for the purpose of overturning the French government, but denied the other. However, he made a very lame business of it, and none of the continental governments gave any credit to his assertions. It was naturally condemned as, on the grounds of retaliation, none of the sovereigns or rulers were safe. It was at the time that I had it in contemplation to effect a descent in England. Your blank did not want to get rid of Napoleon Bonaparte, but of the first consul. Fox had some conversations with me on the subject of the third Nevers. He too, like you, denied that the blank were privy to the scheme of assassination, but faintly, after hearing what I had to say and condemned the whole transaction. Indeed, his own measures were quite opposed to it. The conduct of the Emperor of Germany also formed a striking contrast. When I had possession of his capital, he, through religious motives, positively and with sincerity prohibited any attempt of the kind which might have been executed daily, as I often walked about without suspicion. During the conversation, I mentioned that Bernadotte had been strongly suspected of being lukewarm in the cause of the Allies, if not of playing a double part, that he was called Charles Jean Charlatan and supposed to be likely to join him if any reverse happened to the Allies. Napoleon replied, probably they called him charlatan because he is a Gascon, little inclined to boasting. As to joining me, if I had been successful, he would have done no more than all the rest. The Saxons, Württembergers, Bavarians, and all those who abandoned me when I wasn't fortunate would have joined me again if I had been successful. After Dresden, the Emperor of Austria went upon his knees to me, called me his dear son, and begged for the sake of his very dear daughter, to whom I was married, not to ruin him altogether, but to be reconciled with him. Had it not been for the desertion of the Saxons with their artillery, I should have gained a victory at Leipzig, and the Allies would have been far differently situated. 16th, Napoleon in his bedroom complained of a headache and had his feet immersed in a pail of hot water. At first he was rather melancholy, but subsequently became tolerably lively and communicative. He spoke about Egypt and asked me many questions, amongst others, whether a three-decker could enter the harbor of Alexandria without having been lightened. I replied that I thought it might, or if not, that it might be very easily lightened. Napoleon observed that he had sent an officer named Julian from Cairo with peremptory orders to Brest to enter the harbor of Alexandria, but that unfortunately he was killed by the Arabs on the way. I called, continued he, a fort, which I built at Rosette after him. He asked me if I knew that fort, to which I replied in the affirmative. It was surprising, continued he, how Reyes could have thought of engaging at anchor without having first fortified the island with 20 or 30 pieces of cannon, and having brought out a Venetian 64 and some frigates which he had in the fort of Alexandria. In a conversation which I had with Brest some weeks before on board of the Orient, he himself demonstrated to me that a fleet ought never to engage at anchor, and at least that a fleet which did so must always be beaten on account of the facility which the attacking ships would have of taking up their position, and that an order, whether from Brest or not, I did not understand, actually existed prohibiting it, notwithstanding which Brest himself adopted it afterwards. Brest, continued he, always believed that if Nelson attacked him, it would be made on his right, thinking his left unexpugnable on account of the island, and had prepared matters accordingly. I endeavored to convince him that a ship or two of his left might be taken by a superior force, and an opening afforded thereby for the enemy's fleet to enter. I observed that if Brest had anchored head and stern, he might have gone in much closer to the shore, as he would not have been obliged to make an allowance for the ships to swing, and consequently no space would have been left for Nelson to pass between the French fleet and the land. Napoleon appeared to coincide in this opinion, and said that he would ask the opinion of the admiral on this subject. He added that prior to the departure of Julian, orders had been sent to Brest, and he should not quit the coast of Egypt until after he had ascertained the physical impossibility of the fleet's being able to enter the harbor of Alexandria. If possible, he was ordered to carry it into execution; if not, to proceed to Corfu with his fleet. Now Brest, continued he, not having ascertained the fact, as on the contrary Barre asserted that it was practicable, of which I was also myself convinced, did not think himself authorized to go away, and at the same time was afraid to enter the harbor, even if possible, thinking it hazardous without having been first assured that we were in full possession of the country. He was ignorant of my success at Cairo until 24 hours before he was attacked by Nelson. In this manner, he remained in bounds and neglected to secure himself. Moreover, he never expected that Nelson would have attacked him with an inferior force. If he had brought out his frigates and well fortified the island, Nelson would never have attacked him, or would have been beaten if he had. It was with great difficulty that I made Boreas depart from Toulon. After sailing, he wanted to send 4 ships to attack Nelson, who was laying with 3 demasted vessels at Blank, but I would not allow it, as the success of the enterprise was of too much importance to allow the capture of 2 or 3 ships to be put in competition with it. Boreas afterwards wished to separate the fleet, which I would not permit. Boreas was a man of unquestionable talent, but he wanted that decisive resolution that enables a man to seize an opportunity presented by the moment, which I conceive to be the most essential quality in a general or admiral. Probably from want of experience, he had not that confidence in his own ability and the propriety of his plans, which rarely anything else can impart, unless nature forms a man of so peculiar a stamp as to be enabled to see and decide instantaneously. Nothing but experience can give it. I myself commanded an army at 22 years of age, but nature may be different from most others. If Nelson had met Boreas' fleet going to Egypt, I know not what might have happened. As I had placed 350 or 400 veterans in each line of battleships who were trained to the guns twice a day, and had given orders that each ship should engage one of yours, your vessels were small, and I believe not well manned, and I gave this order to prevent your obtaining any advantages by your superior skill in maneuvering.